Hello YouTube, today is going to be my introduction on my blue-tongued skink Caine, scientific name being Skelequigigus, whatever. In specific, he is a halamahera blue-tongued skink. He is about 9 months old and almost 22 inches long. I haven't weighed him recently. The last time I weighed him, he was about between 120 and 130 grams. He should be about between 150 and 180 grams now. He's quite the fat boy. He is such a sweetheart. So if you're looking on getting a blue-tongued skink, I would prefer your first blue-tongued skink to be either a northern or an eastern. They do get rather large, but the reason I say this is because Caine is an Indonesian blue-tongued skink. And Indonesians, unlike northerns, they require a higher humidity. They have specific care requirements that are a little bit more trickier than northerns or easterns. And as you can see, he is flicking his beautiful blue tongue. They are called blue tongue skinks. They are, despite most reptiles, blue tongue skinks don't have very many defenses. As you can see, they have long, slender bodies, very short, stubby legs, and they're ground dwelling. So when a predator comes, what a blue-tongued skink would do is they would open their mouth very wide and they would flash that blue tongue. That is a trick used by blue tongues to trick predators into thinking that they are venomous, because when they flash that bright blue tongue, a predator such as a bird or a snake or any kind of mammal that could be trying to eat them, they would flash that bright blue tongue, and it would scare the predator away because they would be like, oh shit, this is venomous, I could die. When in all reality, blue tongues are not venomous in the slightest. It does hurt getting bit by one, I would know. Caine has bitten me numerous times on feeding day. He gets very enthusiastic when it comes to feeding, especially being super worms. He's tamed down quite a bit. I've had Caine since he was about 4 or 5 months. He was about 6 to 7 inches when I got him, and now he is pushing 22 inches. So he is going to get a little bit larger, but not much. Blue-tongued skink care, they are omnivorous, meaning they can eat numerous different things, being fruit, protein, vegetables, mice, being pinkies, fuzzies, rat pups, etc. Caine is now feeding on, I was feeding him pinkies once a month, but because he's getting quite larger, I had to bump him up to fuzzy mice, which are a little bit larger, but not much. He does enjoy eating his fuzzies a little bit more than his other food, which I'm going to have to hold back on for a little bit. So I'm going to start feeding him fuzzies from once a month to every other month. Just because I want to give him a different variety. I want him to start eating his vegetables, because when it comes to blue tongues, you want to maintain a 50-40-10 ratio, meaning 50% vegetables and plant matter, 40% protein, and 10% fruits. As a baby, you could switch that around, being 50% protein, 40% vegetables, and 10% fruits. As a baby, they would need more protein to sort of help them during their growing and their development, I should say. Caine is an Indonesian blue-tongued skink. There are other Indonesians such as Milwaukee blue-tongued skinks. There are also the Australians, which are northerns, easterns, shinglebacks, blotch blue-tongues. The shingleback isn't really a blue-tongued skink. They are related to them, but they are not blue-tongued skinks. As you can see, Caine is just a sweetheart. He loves climbing on me. He loves hanging out. His favorite movie is Land Before Time. He is my little dinosaur, as you can see. He's very much like a dog. He loves to play, he loves to walk around, he follows me around my room all the time. He is in a taming process, which means I'm trying to tame him down a little bit, because as you can see, he's very huffy. He hasn't hissed at me, but he does huff. He's like so I'm trying to get him out of that habit, so where when he sees me or when he hears my voice, he is not huffing or trying to run for cover every time he sees me. He is getting better at it, I will say. When he was a baby, he was super flighty, and most animals have a fight or flight response, much like my leopard gecko. He is about 4 months. His name is Lalu, an albino leopard gecko. He is in his fight or flight response, which means when he sees me or when I put my hand in for feeding, he's either bite this thing or leave. So when he's not biting me, he's in his hide almost all day long, all night long. I keep his cage covered with a blanket because his eyes are very sensitive, and I have to get him to a vet because I'm starting to think that Lalu may be going blind. So I do have a vet appointment for that. I also have a vet appointment for Caine to make sure he's healthy, no parasites, no mites, anything like that. If you are looking for a beginner reptile, I would suggest bearded dragons, leopard geckos. As an intermediate reptile, I would say blue tongue is definitely intermediate. They do have specific care requirements, but they are very chill, mostly laid back. I got Caine from Underground Reptiles back in October 17th to be specific. And I did have him shipped to me, and where I live in Ohio, it was about 60 degrees when I got him, so it was chilly, but it wasn't to the point where he could have died. Caine has lived in a 20-gallon long tank. I am in the process of bumping him up to a 40-gallon breeder. I'm going to pick it up this Friday when I get paid. I do take him on walks with me. I've gone to the pet store with him. He's chilled on my shoulder. People at the pet store love him. They love him. And I did have a cashier ask me what kind of reptile he was. So I'm not quite sure if she should be working with pets if she's not kind of brushed up on her info. I did say he was a halamahera blue-tongue skink. He is pushing 200 grams, about 22 inches long. He will be growing to be about 24 inches overall. But with him being still a baby pretty much, I'm expecting him to push between 24 and 28 inches. Because he is rather large for his size, I would say. I mean, I'm not quite sure, but he is pretty large for his size. And as you can see, they are ground dwelling. They live on the ground, under leaf matter. They love burrowing. Caine has a soil bark mix, and I keep his substrate about 3 inches just so he can burrow, he can hide if he wants to. Every once in a while, I'll throw maybe 3 superworms and let him hunt. But I don't feed him on the substrate. Usually I have about 3 or 4 different bowls that I use because I'm trying to tame him so that when he sees a certain bowl, it means food. And I use the blue bowl for this. It's about like a sky blue almost. And he's come to realize that when he sees this blue bowl, it means superworms. When he sees his white bowl, he knows he's getting fruit. I usually put the banana in the white bowl because he loves bananas. I put the bananas in the white bowl and let him eat his bananas. I have a brown bowl which I put his vegetables in, and every once in a while I'll mix it up. I'll throw maybe 3 or 4 mealworms in there, let him hunt, so that when he sees something moving, he's on his strike response, which means he will go for the mealworms, but he will also get other things in his mouth, such as the vegetables that he needs and the fruit that he likes. As a blue-tongued skink, they are omnivorous, which means they can eat anything that you give to them. Plant matter, fruit matter, proteins, different living organisms such as crickets, mealworms, superworms. I've given him hornworms before just to see if he would eat them, but he doesn't really like the hornworms. I think it may be the color, it kind of throws him off, but he's not a big fan on hornworms. He loves superworms. I had to start tweezer feeding him with the tongs because I was hand feeding at first, but he would get way too enthusiastic with hand feeding, and he would end up, when the worm would move, he would end up biting my finger, and let me tell you, it doesn't feel good. Not at all. Out of his cage, he's never bitten me, he's never striked at me, flashed his tongue, anything like that. I've also been handling him since I got him because I want him to tame down. And he does cuddle, he loves cuddling, giving kisses, he'll hide in my hood and go to sleep. We've taken naps together. He will just sleep in my hood, and then I would fall asleep, and he wouldn't really take off, run away. He was for the most part, just sleeping in my hood, and he would stay there. You can also, if you live in a tropical region such as Florida, North Carolina, anything like that where it doesn't really get super duper cold or snowy or anything like that, you can build an outside enclosure and let them live outside. I am in the process of building a summer enclosure. It's about 6 feet long, I want to say 4 feet wide, and about 3 feet high. And I am on the process of building a screen top that locks with a locking key, because I want to be sure that he has that security where if a bird comes down, it's not going to get him. There are also stray cats in my neighborhood, and I want to make sure that cats can't get to him, dogs that run around, birds, anything like that. He's not really scared of dogs that much. I have a I have a blue pit bull, a blue-nosed pit bull. Her name is Layla. And he's very curious. He looks at Layla, he'll flick his tongue, and then he'll walk away. He's like, yeah, whatever. Layla, however, is in her puppy phase still. She's about 2 years old, but she still thinks that she's a 4-month-old puppy. Like, she's very curious. She wants to know what it is, what's that, what's it moving, what is it doing. So she'll put her nose up to him, but he doesn't really flash his tongue, which shows me that he's not scared of her. He's not in his flight or fright response where he's like, this thing's gonna eat me. Nothing like that. He's just like, whatever, and then he'll walk away. I don't really feed him outside of his cage because he feels more secure eating in his cage, so I'll just put a bowl in there and I'll let him eat, and then when he's done, I'll take the bowl out. Just because what I feed him an omnivore mix, and I will show you. This is the Zilla omnivore mix. I have 3 bags. He's almost out of this bag. It does in fact have fruit and vegetables in it. It also has what was I gonna say? It has crickets, mealworms. What else is in here? Sun-dried bok choy, dehydrated zucchini, dehydrated green beans, dehydrated peas, dehydrated bananas, sun-dried carrots, dehydrated crickets, dehydrated mealworms, and dehydrated silkworm pupae. And I want to say this silkworm pupae is the big brown things that he likes. I'm not quite sure. But basically this mix, if you get a bowl of water, you'd put the normal eating amount, what you would think he would eat in about between a 5 and a 10 minute eating period. So basically you get a bowl, you fill it with water, and then you dump the omnivore mix in the water, and you would let it sit for about 5 minutes just so it can absorb the water, it can look lively, so to speak. And then you would drain the water out. You can press down on the food to drain any excess water. You would put it in a bowl, and then bada bing bada boom, you have lizard food. I also am in the process of breeding superworms, and I'm on my 6th generation, almost 7th generation, because I do have beetles again of mealworms. And he would eat way too many mealworms. He would eat about between 40 and 50 mealworms in 10 minutes. So I went from mealworms to superworms, which he eats less of because they're bigger. So I would offer him about between 10 and 15 superworms. Whatever he doesn't eat, I will put back in the bin for the breeding purpose. Mealworms I usually keep for Lalu, my albino leopard gecko, or Euplabrius macularia. I want to say that's right. Lalu, I am believing that Lalu is going blind, so I will need to get him to a vet to kind of check in on that, make sure everything's okay, everything's good. Same thing with Caine. He has a vet appointment because about a month ago I noticed some dark lines forming around his mouth, and I was terrified that it was mouth rot forming. I took him to the vet that week, and they told me that it was not mouth rot, that it was just dirt stuck in his mouth in the crevices between his scales, and that his enclosure was most likely way too humid. So I had to take all the substrate out, put new substrate in, and not put as much water as I did the last batch. So to keep humidity, I soaked I'm not sure how much. I've soaked 2 packages of sphagnum moss to keep humidity in lukewarm to hot water, and then I drained the water out and I laid it across the bottom of his enclosure, and then I put the substrate over top and the bark over top of that. Altogether, his substrate is about 4 inches deep, between 3 and 4 inches deep. I do have it deeper in some spots where I notice he likes to burrow at, so I keep it deeper on that spot and then less deep on the other end, so it's kind of like a ramp formation, sort of. But he does love burrowing. He burrows all day long, especially when he's in shed. He likes to burrow down where his heat mat is, so he can get his heat. I have noticed that, and blue tongues, when they shed, they don't shed like snakes in one piece. Their shedding is very broken, where they will shed more in one spot, and then they will start shedding in the rest of them. I noticed first that Caine starts shedding first in his back area. So his back would be very broken scaled. Every now and then I do assist him in shedding, just because when he was a baby, I don't know if you can see, but when he was a baby, he lost one of his toes to the siblings. But when it comes to lizards, if shed is stuck around maybe the tip of the tail, their toes, they can in fact drop those parts of their bodies. And with blue tongues, it won't grow back. Unlike a leopard gecko, where if they drop their tail, it will grow back, just not look the same as it did. In a blue tongue, if they were to drop a toe, it's not going to grow back. If they were to drop, say, half of their tail, it's not going to grow back. It would heal, yes, but it's not going to grow back like a leopard gecko's would. So when he is in shed, I do like to soak him and then take a Q-tip, dab it in the water, and then kind of roll the skin off of his toes so that it's not stuck. He's not going to lose any more toes than he already did. He's very huffy and not really liking to be touched when he's in shed. So I kind of leave him alone when he's shedding, and then towards the end of his shed, I noticed his shed usually lasts about a week to get completely off. All of his, from the tip of his nose down to the tip of his tail, it takes about a week. And so I wait, for example, if he were to shed on a Monday, I would wait till the following Monday before I would soak him and help him get the rest of that shed off. Just because I want to make sure that he's getting what he can get off. And he does have a bark log in his enclosure that he rubs up against, and that seems to help him get the shed off. So I leave that in. I also mist his cage during shed just to make sure that he keeps the humidity. He doesn't really like to eat. I noticed during shed he kind of goes through a fast where he's not really eating much during his shed. He'll wait till after he's done shedding to eat. So I usually don't offer food till about that following Monday, for example, if he were to shed, to feed him. And I would. And Caine is a male. I had him sexed when I bought him. I got him from Underground Reptiles. The person I don't remember who exactly I spoke to, but he was very helpful. I paid for overnight shipping, so I waited for a day that I was off of work to have him shipped, just to make sure that I would be home and I would be able to get him, just because it was October, it was a little bit chilly, and I didn't want to leave him waiting outside. The person I spoke to on the phone was very helpful. They let me know everything that was going on with my shipment, everything that was going, whether he was healthy, what he was eating. He was feeding mainly on dog food, so I tried to cut back on that. I tried to mix vegetables and fruits in with the dog food that he was eating, and that seemed to help him break out of his dog food habit. As you can see, he's just very calm. He's very curious, very intelligent. He just kind of loves walking around. So if you do plan on getting a blue tongue, I would recommend walk around time, or what I call room time, where I would take Caine out of his enclosure. I would give him free rein in my room, let him walk around, let him explore, climb up different things, play in different things. He loves paper towels, newspapers, things that he can kind of tear up with his fingers. He has a bouncy ball that he likes to play with. He'll bounce it around my room. He's not a huge fan on Lalu. I haven't given him an introduction yet, but he's not a huge fan on Lalu. I'm not sure what it is. Maybe it's the size difference, but he's very predatory when it comes to Lalu. He sees his tail wiggling and he's like, "What's that? It's a worm. Let me get it." So he does try to bite through the Lalu's tank to get his tail. He does, but I feel like if I were to do a formal introduction with them too, obviously not up close because I don't want anything happening to either of my babies, But through the glass, whether I would hold Lalu up to Caine's cage or Caine up to Lalu's cage, just so that they can see each other, know that their presence is there, know they're around, and they kind of have to get over the fact that there's another reptile in the room. Lalu is about 4 to 5 months. I would get him out, but I have Caine out right now, and I don't know how that would work. Also, Lalu doesn't really like being handled. I'm still trying to break him out of that habit. But yeah, if you're planning on getting a blue tongue, I would recommend a northern or an eastern blue tongue. They do get a little bit larger than Indonesians, but they don't have as much of a specific care requirement as Indonesians do, such as northerns and easterns are mainly from Australia. You can't get them in the US unless a breeder in the US is breeding them. Australia doesn't have an import on northerns or easterns, so you can't get an Australian blue tongue skink from Australia, if that makes sense. Because Underground Reptiles is in Florida, I had Caine shipped to me. And most people that say that call me a monster, an animal, saying, how dare you ship your reptile, how dare you have this poor animal shipped in a box. He was only in the box overnight, and as soon as I got him I actually I ran to the mail truck to get him, and as soon as I got him in the house, I opened the box, I let him walk around, I let him get warmed up, accustomed to his aquarium, and he was nose surfing, I think the first 2 weeks, but I did cut him out of that habit as soon as I started room time. He stopped nose surfing, and he's just very calm, very curious, very intelligent. He loves to cuddle. He'll nuzzle up in my neck. But as you can see, for their size requirements, I would recommend not introducing them to a dog unless you are absolutely sure that you have control over your lizard and your dog. Just because, especially with reptiles, dogs can be very indirect, very, I don't really know how to say this, but, damn it, I had it and then I lost it. Dogs, you never know what they're gonna do, so to speak. Even if you know your dog very, very well, you've been together since you were a puppy, or the dog was a puppy and you were a baby. If you bring a new animal in the house, a dog would be very jealous, same as a cat. They would be very jealous because not all your attention is going to them anymore. When I brought Caine home, Layla was very jealous, very not aggressive, so to speak, but she was very irritated, very irritable. She would come in my room, sleep on my bed, and then if I were to bring Caine out, she would get automatically upset. She was upset that I wasn't cuddling with her. I was more focused on Caine, what he's doing, where he's going. I don't want him kind of getting lost in my house because I don't think my mom would appreciate that. Also, when you're getting a reptile, whether it being any kind of reptile, you want to make sure that you have permission from your parents. Don't be like me and just get the reptile and then call it done. I've bred leopard geckos, specifically fat-tailed geckos, since I was about 9 years old. I've gone to every reptile show in Cleveland from the time I was 8 till I turned about 14. I haven't gone recently just because I do work, but I do plan on going soon. When you get your reptile, whether it be from a breeder, pet store, when I go to pet stores, I always ask questions to the workers, just because I like to test their intelligence. I want to see what they know, if they're informing people right. So I like to ask questions that I already know. For example, my leopard gecko, I asked the worker before I bought him, what is he eating? Because, I mean, I kind of know what he's feeding, but I want to get a good idea on what they're feeding him. And she said, well, they're eating very wide variety, crickets, mealworms. So I was like, okay, what kind of heating would you recommend? I know that leopard geckos need belly heat to digest their food. And she said, well, they do have an under tank heating mat in this enclosure, but I do have a heat bulb just to maintain the overall heat throughout the enclosure. So I was like, okay, she knows what she's talking about, which means she's informing other people on the right information. She's not just like, oh, well, they're living on sand, they need a heat bulb. And they're desert animals. They need sand, they need this, they need that. No, she was very helpful. She actually knew what she was doing. She knew what she was talking about. So I can tell that she's been there a while. And by talking to her, she said that she has a tarantula at home. So I know that she's very well informed on the reptile world, whether it be arachnids, lizards, snakes, etc. I do plan on getting a snake very soon. I still need to talk to my mom on that because my mom hates snakes. My mom hates snakes. If your mom hates snakes, and you have one, let me know what you did to get one because I want one so badly. But Caine, as I said, he's about 22 inches long. He fits, if I can get him to sit right. The tip of his nose is from the tip of my fingers, and his tail stretches past a little bit past my elbow. He's not sitting on my hand completely right now, so he does look like he's from tip of my fingers down to my elbow. What else was I going to talk about? Humidity. In Caine's enclosure, I do maintain a humidity of about 40 to 50% humidity. Northerns, Easterns, Shinglebacks, blotched blue tongues, the Australian species, they don't really need a high humidity because they are bush dwelling animals, meaning they roam around the bush. They kind of just chill under different things. And Australia is relatively dry compared to the Indonesian species, so they don't really need a high humidity, which is why I recommend Northerns or Easterns as a first blue tongue. And when you're getting a blue tongue, I recommend getting a baby just so you can handle them more as a baby. They get used to you, they tame down, and then they become your best friend. Caine is very much my best friend. He sees himself in the camera, so he's like, hey, sexy. I do kiss him. We cuddle. He climbs all over me. Forgot what else I was going to cover. Vet bills. Caine's vet bill costed me about $200 to $300 just because I had numerous different tests done. I had physicals, everything that he needed done, and my bill without the tax costed about $280, between $280 and $300. Overall, it costed about $320, which is fine. I mean, that comes to owning reptiles. You need to be able to know if anything were to go wrong with your reptile, if you could afford the vet bill. Now, if this question is lingering in your mind, then I don't recommend getting a reptile unless you know for sure that you can care for it. And sorry. So yeah. They're very curious, very intelligent. When I got Caine, I didn't ask my mom. That was fuck up number one. Always, 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 even if it's not a reptile, if it's just a furry animal, always, always, always ask your parents first, because you don't want to go in and buy an animal and then find out you can't keep it, and then you have to rehome it, you have to send it back, and then that's just money wasted. Me, I'm a little bit more unorthodox, so to say, because my mom is not a huge fan on reptiles. My mom doesn't really like reptiles, whether it being snakes, lizards, spiders, anything like that. My mom hates reptiles. But it's worked in the past for me. I found out that if I were to get the animal and I were to already have paid for it, my mom has trouble saying no once I already purchased the animal, which is what happened with Caine here. And at the time, I did have two turtles, two red-eared sliders, both female. I had Squirt and Xena. And in order to keep Caine, I had to rehome both Squirt and Xena. Squirt was about, I've had Squirt since she was about the size of a quarter. I did purchase her illegally. But because she was being not taken care of properly, I, so to speak, adopted Squirt. And I kept her ever since she was a baby. She is now pushing about 10 inches in diameter, so she is quite the big girl now. Xena, I didn't really purchase Xena. She was given to me by a friend of a family who couldn't keep her anymore. And me loving reptiles, I've loved reptiles ever since I was little. I used to have a savanna monitor named Savi. I've had turtles, frogs, you name it, I've had it. I do, however, love reptiles. I hope to study herpetology one day. Go to school for it, get a good job with it. I hope to travel one day. get a feel of the different reptiles, hopefully uncover a species that hasn't been discovered yet, or one that's endangered, or one that's on the verge of extinction. That is my dream job, is to be a herpetologist. I forgot what I was saying. I also have 2 hermit crabs. Both are not here. They're both temporary animals. I got them from a person who wasn't keeping them properly. So I'm only keeping them until their health is right where it needs to be, where they're happy and healthy. And then I hope to rehome them. They are not permanent animals. They're not pets of mine. I did name them Yin Yang and Mogwai. If you've ever seen the Gremlins, you know what I'm talking about. I also have a betta fish named Nemo. I have a albino Cory catfish named Fish. And I also have 2 mystery snails named Petrie and Turtle. As you can see, I love my reptiles. Forgot what else I was going to cover. Sexing. When I got Caine, he was already sexed for me. I did pay extra for them to sex him for me, because blue-tongued skinks are a little bit harder to sex. You can't, unlike a snake, you can't just pop out the hemipenes and then be like, oh, it's a boy. They're a little bit harder to sex. Females get slightly larger than the males. Their head is a little bit more slender, more triangular, whereas males have a more broader shaped head, if that makes sense. My leopard gecko, because I've been keeping them so long, I know what to look for. A male will have a V-shape hemipene pores on the base of their tail. That means they're a boy. If they don't have that, then they're a girl. Lalu is in fact a boy. I will get him out for you here real quick, just so you can see him. And he is in shed, so his color is going to be a little bit more pastel, more plain. This is Lalu, my albino leopard gecko. He is in shed. I love that yellow color on him. I think it's gorgeous. He doesn't like light, which is pretty typical of albinos. He's about 4 to 5 months old. He has shed for me about 4 times already. He's not a big fan on being handled, which is what makes me believe he is still in his fight or flight response, which I'm trying to break him out of the not wanting to be touched, not wanting to be handled phase, because I do want him to interact with me. Not like Caine, but I do want him to interact somewhat so that I can hold him, I can take him out if I need to clean his cage. Leopard geckos, they're pretty basic. You keep about 3 hides in their enclosure, 1 on the cool side, 1 on the hot side, and then a humid hide for shedding. Lalu does bathing, so I don't really need the humid hide. I bathe him every other day, and when he's in shed, I bathe him every day. He is also kept on paper towel as the substrate because sand is not good. Neither is like walnut chips, or not chips, walnut shell, cracked walnut shells, anything like that, because leopard geckos flick their tongue, and they have, I forget what the name of the organ is, but they do flick their tongue, and when they flick their tongue, they can take in substrate. So if you're keeping your leopard gecko on sand, I highly suggest switching them over to something that's less likely to cause impaction. So paper towel, just sheet paper, newspaper. I keep mine on paper towel. I've done this for years, and I feel it works way better than anything else that I've ever used. It's easy to clean. Very basic, but it's easy to clean, and there's no impaction involved. I can feed him on it and know that he's not going to cause himself any harm if he ingests anything. I do keep on stock about, I try to maintain at least 3 paper towel rolls, just because I like to know that I can switch out the substrate if it needs changed. And because Caine is very messy, he's very, very messy. If I feed him bananas, it gets everywhere, so I like to keep paper towels on stock. That way if it squishes in my fingers, I can wipe it off. I have I'm not sure how big it is. I want to say it's about 1.5 feet by about 10 inches. I have a bin that I keep the mealworms in, and I have a bran substrate mixed with oatmeal, and I throw in carrot pieces, potato pieces to feed my mealworms. I do the same thing for my superworms. Superworms are similar to mealworms, but a lot bigger and a lot meaner. Most people say, oh, superworms they don't bite, they don't do this. I've personally been bitten by a superworm, and it hurts. I'd rather be bitten by Caine. Also, mealworms, they're smaller, so I keep the mealworms for Lalu, and then I keep the superworms for Caine specifically. Every once in a while, if Caine won't eat his superworms, I will give him a few mealworms just to know that he's getting his protein from different insects. I also like to switch it up. I will throw a little bit of dog food mixed with his vegetables, mixed with his fruit. He's not big on hand feeding anymore because I did switch him over to the tongs. He's not a big fan on hand feeding any longer. He will eat from a bowl, but I do have to kind of tap the bowl with the tongs, kind of wave it around to him so he sees where they're at. But he's very basic to care for. Not as basic as a leopard gecko, but they are pretty easy to care for, pretty easy to tame down. If you do plan on getting a blue-tongued skink, if they are in their fight or flight response, and they're opening their mouth, they're hissing, they're flashing their tongue at you, don't pursue them. Give them time to adjust. I gave Caine about 2 weeks to adjust to his enclosure before I started handling him. And you would want to keep them out with you about 15 minutes every day. And then as soon as they get used to the 15 minutes, then you would keep them out a little longer. You would go from 15 to 20 minutes, 20 to 25, 25 to 30, so on, so on, so on. Until they get completely used to you. You can talk to them. They are very smart, very intelligent, so they do know voices and they do know faces. When I get home from work, Caine is always in the front of his tank waiting for me. I have to sing him to sleep. He's a big baby. He's very spoiled. So yeah, predators being birds, cats, dogs, outdoors enclosures. The larger the better. In the summer, I do plan on giving Caine, I want to say about 20 minutes. I'm going to start him off with 15 minutes outside so he can get his natural UVB from the sun, and he can also walk around the grass, get exercise. He can hunt the different insects because my yard is very populated by crickets in the summer, so he can get his cricket time, also exercise and UVB. As I said, I'm in the process of building an outdoor enclosure, which I hope will be ready by June. I have been working on it very frequently. I will show you Caine's enclosure. It's very basic. He is, in fact, in a 20-gallon. He has his log hide, a couple rocks he can climb on. I have the temperature gauge in the back, which shows 108 degrees on the hot side. It's about 80, I want to say 75 to 80 degrees on the cool side. I have his little card in case I were to go out of town or anything. That way my mom or my sister, whoever is taking care of him while I'm gone, knows his temperament. They know what he's eating on. I have a little water fountain he climbs on. He likes to get his water out of there. I had a water bowl in there, but he was pooping in it, and that's not very sanitary for them. In case they do ingest it, they can get very sick. They can ingest parasites. He has his vegetables for the day that he's been eating on, the omnivore mix, which I showed you, and I also cut up some excess green beans, carrots, peas. This is Lalu's enclosure, which I need to clean out. It's very basic. I made the background myself.